You need to buy yourself a gun. What? Gun? What? Like a handgun. For personal protection. If somebody tries to mug you. What? What if your government tries to throw you in a can? What? You're gonna want a shotgun. Oh. What? An automatic rifle. And a lot of ammo. Gun? Yeah, gun.
We're all set to riot. Buy a gun. Before you lose your Second Amendment. Buy a gun. They'll burn you out like you Waco. They'll stick your ass in a camp. 10-foot cops in riot gear, gonna kick your ass and laugh. The revolution is on its way. Better lock and load your AK. Buy a gun, 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 buy a gun before you wish you bought a gun. Buy a gun, 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 buy a gun before you wish you bought a gun. We're all set to riot. Buy a gun. Before you lose your Second Amendment. Buy a gun. They gave your money to the banksters. They stole your pension funds. It's time that we took to the streets. It's time we had our turn. A revolution is on its way, and the founding fathers would say, buy a gun, 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 buy a gun before you wish you bought a gun. Buy a gun, 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 buy a gun before you wish you bought a gun. Revolution's not clean and neat, you gotta riot in the streets. Revolution's not clean and neat, you gotta drag them through the streets.
It is Tuesday. We are live. This is PrimerTime on UCY.TV. My name is Michael.
My name is Nicholas, and it is good to be here.
Nick, it's good to hear you, man. I am glad to hear that you are not voting for Professor Freebie or for the Wicked Witch of the West.
Well, yes, that would be counterproductive to my owning of guns.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a fairly important topic, a topic that major media, social media has glommed onto. Whole lot of confiscation talk coming out right now, and that's kind of directly in the face of the "they're not coming for your guns" rhetoric.
Yeah, so, I believe the term was bitter clingers. That was out of the last debate cycle and presidential election cycle. And it's come to the point now where, the Democrat Party is indistinguishable from socialists who are running and seeking the nomination. So, if you've known anything about a socialist style of government, you know that private ownership of weapons just doesn't happen.
Well, and we have to discuss why that doesn't happen.
Oh, well, yeah, because it becomes a threat to the continued style of government for any socialist enterprise.
And if you've got the ability to have a firearm, then you have the ability to stand up to the threat of, well, the means of production being taken from you and given to the state, which is
here's a story that's near and dear to my heart, and I suspect it is yours as well. Well, let me tell you the story about a man we'll call Juan. Juan was he was an American citizen at the time of his death. Very hardworking man. Had grown up in many cases, many countries around the world, but primarily in Cuba and Spain. And
he went through some fairly interesting times in both those countries.
It certainly did, and Spain dealt with the Civil War. This is the Spanish Civil War, which was basically the testing ground for all German equipment that was used later in World War II. But then later, during his post-war years, in the sunny tropics of Cuba. And Juan was an entrepreneur. Juan was a businessman and a bit of a gentleman adventurer, I think you could say.
I think that's a fair assessment of the man, yeah.
Yeah. Having raced in the Grand Prix of Havana, having been an entrepreneur and owning several businesses, one of which was the Acapulco Theater, which is now a state-owned property. And it was immediately after the January 1st, 1959 revolution that brought a socialist government into power. Yeah, I could say that. Yeah, you lose a lot of personal property, and the right to get that property back when
Does not exist.
exactly when a socialist government takes over. So you can imagine if they're gonna run off with your personal owned property, such as a business or a facility or a building. You can imagine
Or your home domicile, your very own home.
exactly. So the funny thing is that you hear a lot of people espousing the benefits of socialism, and I heard something on the radio today that just almost made me shit my pants, and it was, socialism isn't all that bad. We just haven't found a way that it works yet. And I'm starting to think that this has been tried around the world, and if we haven't found a way that it works yet,
Now the argument will be that true socialism and true communism has never been tried around the world. That all we've seen is, the doctrine of Mao and Stalinism. And I kind of find that to be, number one, a disingenuous argument, because the concept behind full-blown communism really, it cannot exist because, well, people are people. And,
not only are people. Greed and protection of the state is basically the core tenet of socialism, is to remove any kind of deity or anything that can give a person hope. Remove that, replace it with the state as the sole provider of means, and whether that's a job, whether that's funding for anything, and it eliminates the ability of the individual to seek out a better life. So, you hear Bernie, who is Mr. I am an independent, for however many years in the Senate, and then when it's time that he wants to, run, all of a sudden he's running on the Democrat ticket. So, to Hillary Clinton, who is as socialist as the day is long, I think what you have there is
I think she described herself as a progressive who likes to get things done.
Well, and if you mean like get things done by breaking every law she ever comes in contact with, then yeah, she's getting a lot of that done.
Yeah, that's fairly interesting. I did see that the FBI was kind of made some complaints that I guess the White House is getting in the way of the email investigation. And
say it ain't.
Well, honestly, I'm really kind of disappointed in.
So you
mean
to tell me an organization that is being run by an appointee of the president is saying that they're being stonewalled by the White House?
Yeah, that's to me it's kind of interesting, and it just kind of further cements my my thesis that, well, Hillary is the next president, and really keep an eyeball on who she picks as the vice president.
Well, see, here I look at it a little different like this. It's no secret that the Clintons and the Obama administration are no big fans of each other. In order for Hillary to go ahead and acquiesce during the last presidential election, and in order for Obama to just go ahead and quit the debate circuit and really take ownership, basically he agreed to pay off almost all of her remaining campaign debt, and in turn she would be given a juicy position within the administration, which ended up being Secretary of State.
She's fairly juicy as far as positions go.
Yeah, if you're talking number 3 or 4, depending upon time of war, in line to the presidency, you're pretty good. So
not only that, I mean, look at how much access to foreign cash and influence that got diverted to her.
There you go. There's the rub, because everybody knows that anytime something had to deal with reconstruction or benefit aid, anything like that, whether it's Haiti, whether it's doing deals with Ukrainian businessmen, you got to go through the Hill and Hillary Clinton Foundation, right?
Right. And we could start looking at really all the Chinese guys. that had strange access to her.
Yeah, that would be a violation of the campaign contributions laws that we have in this country with unnamed foreign campaign contributions.
Yeah, well, these aren't really all that unnamed. It would be the Chinese government, and I mean,
well, there you go. Yeah,
you start looking back through the history, and Bill Clinton basically sold the Chinese all the guts of L'Oreal and of Motorola, which gave them incredible targeting ability for their nuclear weapons, and
I'll even go you one better. It's widely understood that during the Kosovo bombing campaign, little known fact is that the United States bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. And
I remember that they thought it was an aspirin factory or something.
Whatever the case was, they said that the reason that it happened was that they were using outdated maps that were digitally loaded to the GPS systems.
Once again, U.S. Americans and their lack of maps, such as.
And it just so happened that occurred less than a week after the Chinese announced that they had indigenously produced multiple reentry vehicles for nuclear warheads. So, this is one of those things where the money goes back, and this was also at the time where a Chinese American scientist was being
Charlie Tree.
Who?
Charlie Tree.
No,
I believe his name was Charlie.
No, Wen Ho Lee.
Oh, Wen Ho Lee. Yeah, Charlie Tree was another one.
Yeah.
Charlie Tree was another mystery donor, spy, whatever, to the Clinton Foundation.
So
working for American people.
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, Hillary Clinton has been in the news this week for really saying some alarming things about confiscation of personally owned firearms, and I think we really need to hit on that today because there's two candidates out there that are running out in front for the Democratic national nomination. The things that Hillary Clinton said and the things that Bernie Sanders have said should scare the crap out of people.
And I think anybody who looks at the two-facedness of it all, because Bernie Sanders claims to be almost a friend to gun owners. If you listen to Hillary talk, because he voted against the assault weapons ban 5 times or something like. I don't even know, but he's not necessarily a friend to guns. And I mean, if the NRA is any kind of metric, they gave him a D- rating, and I think that's pretty low.
Well, you don't get much lower than a D-, but as we all know in American high school, D stands for diploma.
That's right. What do you call the guy who graduates last in medical school? Doctor. Yeah.
So and the funny thing is that Hillary Clinton has come right out and said that she is full on in support of confiscation. This isn't like a hey, let's retroactively go and register firearms that people have purchased. Let's get some background checks performed. No, she's talking about pure socialism. She's talking about a government removing personal owned property from an individual that the government has no right to own.
But don't worry. She said that you'll be compensated adequately, with no definition as to compensation or definition as to adequate. Now, if we look back, the model she's looking at, she's looking at the Australian gun ban, which happened after they call the Port Arthur massacre.
Right.
Which,
so
it's an interesting subject on its own, the Port Arthur massacre, because you've got the gunman who, by all accounts, is a sub-moron, and I don't mean that as any insult to sub-morons, but he's got an IQ of 80, and he killed 30 people, several with headshots, firing from the hip with an AR-15.
That doesn't sound like he's of some mental caliber to me.
Right. Well, then there's like pretty much every one of the mass shootings that gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of indiscrepancies with this. There's many reports of multiple shooters at Port Arthur. And instead of just the one shooter. kind of very interesting in relation to this was Port Arthur's a small town. It's not necessarily a major metropolis,
right?
And their coroner's office, within days before the incident happened, they took receipt of a coroner's van that was able to hold 14 bodies at one time. Now that's kind of a strange item to have for an area that's never really had a need for that. That's kind of a big ticket item that's not going to necessarily see a lot of use unless there's something planned. I can't remember the name of the politician, but just a few months before Port Arthur, he basically said that there will be no gun control in Australia until there's a massacre in Tasmania.
Oh, and we call that the kiss of death.
Right. So it's kind of here that Americans won't find any need for gun control until it happens in Kansas or something like that.
Until there's terror in the heartland.
Right. Bin Laden's going to behead you while you're trying to go get your Pop-Tarts at the Family Dollar.
Yeah.
So,
the funny thing is that for anybody that isn't really familiar with the Australian model of gun control, this was a forced confiscation of personally owned firearms. We're talking a lot of shotguns, a lot of .22 rifles, a lot of .22 pistols.
Let's talk about exactly what it banned. All right, it banned anything that was
semi-automatic. Yes,
anything that could be considered self-loading. It banned pump shotguns. So basically, all that is allowed, and every handgun. And this is also pretty much the same path that they followed in the United Kingdom after Dunblane. And once again, that's another interesting story. There's some fairly interesting facts that come up, several years after the fact. The shooter in Dunblane may have been tied into the current pedophile scandal that's rocking the UK. And so I don't think any of these things are genuine. I truly have a lot of questions about any of these incidents that are being forced on us. And then if you have a question, your question is immediately dismissed as being insensitive to the needs of the children and the heroes and the families of the victims. I think the minute you cannot ask a question, that should be a big red flag about anything.
Yeah,
if you must, there's something that's being forced on you.
Well, we always like to say that from the World War II vets that as soon as you start taking flak, you're getting close to the target. So, the funny thing is that the louder the criticism gets, the closer to the truth you probably are.
Which, this leads into a bunch of questions because, we've seen in the last couple of days, if you look on the Republican side of the whole debate, Trump has said some fairly interesting things about 9/11, and which has caused some consternation from major media such as CNN. CNN just can't believe he actually went there. He kind of laid it at Bush's doorstep. You were in charge. This is your fault. And up until Trump said that, anybody else who said it was a crazy man.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing that I have a problem with. Right. I have a problem with this because it's no secret right now that the Trump and the Bush families are no friends and fans of each other. But I think that if, as Trump, you're going to go ahead and make that accusation against Bush for a World Trade Center bombing, you kind of got to go to what happened in '93 at the World Trade Center bombing, and the other side of the coin, which is the guy whose wife you're giving money to, was in charge when that tower was bombed then. So, Donald Trump is nothing if he's not an opportunist, and I don't see him as any friend to a gun owner.
Absolutely. I think Donald Trump is in the process of telling the passengers on the plane that everything is hunky-dory while he's packing a parachute. That's kind of the way I see it. I think Trump is an amazing an amazing showman is really what he is. He's a master of earning free publicity.
Right. He's the P.T. Barnum of our time.
And he can talk his way out of pretty much anything he needs to talk his way out of.
Well, here's the thing. You take a look at it like this. You know, we're in an age now where anytime you criticize somebody on the ad hominem attack, you're pretty much outed, and you know your argument doesn't stand on its own. So when Trump makes those comments about women in general, as he's done over the years, or as he's talked about, you know, Carly Fiorina, Rosie O'Donnell, all these other women that he goes after, you know, it's looked at to the side. You know, people are just like, oh, that's just Donald being Donald. You know,
but when he says it, he gets a lot of people who will agree with him, no matter how offensive or, you know, distasteful or against your core beliefs the statement is. And I think truly he gets these followers not because they believe him, but because he's got some balls to say kind of something that's against the dominant paradigm, you know, the overriding message. So I think that's perhaps a symbol of the malcontent of the nation. But really getting into the 9/11 thing, you know, that's actually I think him kind of like throwing it at Bush. That really throws up a whole lot of questions and brings up a lot of questions that a lot of people have had for 15 years. I mean,
but see, here's the thing. I honestly do not believe you can throw that type of criticism when it wasn't the first attack at that location. I think that argument that he's using is false logic, and I think that it's inflammatory and it's designed to be inflammatory for that reason. So you know, you can imagine how many attempted terror attacks we've had in the last couple of years. And you can determine, you know, on your own what is truly terror and what is actual just crime.
If the FBI or the CIA is involved, and which honestly I can't think of a terror attack in the last 10 years or the last 15 years, to be honest with you, it doesn't have some sort of weird government agency footprint all over it. You know, like we saw in '93. Basically the bomber for the Twin Towers, the guy who was setting it up, was being fed all this stuff by FBI agents, and he actually recorded them.
Well,
you know,
yeah,
and he was given explosives by the FBI agent. And you know, we could go to any one of these recent terror events. Like one that springs to mind immediately is the one that happened in Portland a couple years ago, where
that Christmas shooting, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't a shooting. It was an attempted bombing. Somebody was gonna, I guess he had a truck full of road flares and propane tanks and gasoline and stuff like that, and you know, he was getting ready to set it off, and you know, the FBI swooped in, and you know, it always comes out, well, we've had this man under surveillance for so long, and blah blah blah, and then it comes out that
we gave him the device that he thought he was going to blow up.
Exactly. I mean, Jesus Christ, who are they working for?
Well, here's the thing. You know, for somebody that's done investigations in some not so nice places and really getting after the folks that are conducting those types of attacks, if you want to go ahead and get more information and you want to expose the network, you don't necessarily pick off the little fish or the guy who's just going to pull the trigger. You will milk that to get as much information out of it as you can to establish the network and exploit it. So, you know, take a little on that one. That I think they have experience in dealing with these guys and trying to expose their connections to other folks. And it's usually just stuff online. It's people online that these individuals may have never met. They just happen to have a contact with them, and that's who they go to. So, you know, the big thing that I see, and like I said, just trying to bring this back full circle, you've got on both sides of these nominations, you've got folks that are no friend to gun owners, no supporter of the Second Amendment, and on one side of the House have personally said that, the Second Amendment needs to be reined in. And
no, Hillary Clinton said that the Supreme Court was absolutely incorrect on the Second Amendment.
And if you take a look at the courts over time, depending upon what president screws the pooch and puts in a wolf in sheep's clothing, it can really skew the results of the court for a generation, which give or take is about 20 years. You can still see the impacts of having, Anthony Kennedy
or a David Souter or a John Roberts coming
exactly. And, John Roberts wasn't without criticism in terms of him saying that Obamacare is a penalty, and basically paving the way for this to go along. I think that what we have is as a large problem in part is that justices on this court and future justices, I do not believe will allow settled law to stand. And there is historical precedence of people going back and, fighting, justices going back and fighting to overturn decisions that have been made. You have Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the separate but equal, and then that being overturned in the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, which ruled that segregation or separate but equal was not constitutional. So there is historical precedent there, and I feel that no matter how recently, and I think it was 2009 that the Supreme Court affirmed that the Second Amendment guarantees and protects an individual's right to own and bear firearms. I can see that in our lifetime, in the next 30 years, I can see that being set up for another decision.
For a nullifier, yeah, I can as well. I mean,
well, I'm not going to say that they're going to nullify it. I can say that within the next 20 to 30 years, you will see a lawsuit that makes its way through the court, which will take on a innocuous, portion of a previous decision, and will force a vastly different made up court to consider the merits of the argument. And unfortunately, I don't see that decision. If I was to look into a crystal ball, I would say that the future makeup of a court, and largely is going to depend on what happens within the next 18 months in terms of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that fine Irish name. What she's on
her way out.
Well, it's not only that she's on her way out. This is the justices that sit on the court are supposed to be independent of any political party, and they're supposed to advocate for the Constitution and be a check on the other two branches of government to determine constitutionality, both of executive actions and legislation that's enacted by Congress. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing that the court as it stands is the arbiter of laws being made and a nullifier of actions set up by either the president and or Congress. And that far exceeds the original plan and the original powers that the founding fathers set out for them. Because initially, the Supreme Court was set to be the weakest of the three branches of government. And I would say that they are now, probably in terms of the power that they wield, well ahead of the Congress itself, which was originally supposed to be the most powerful branch of the government.
Well, we can see that they are exercising their power in many different ways. None of it really is working well for the Second Amendment or for the common gun owner. We're seeing. Well, the Supreme Court just upheld New York and Connecticut's gun laws. They said those were completely constitutional. So, the New York SAFE Act, which was, written and signed and passed in the middle of the night. I believe
debate.
It was Christmas. Yeah, without debate, like on a Christmas Eve at 11:30 at night or something like that, which now has been found to be completely unenforceable. And not only is it completely unenforceable, but the provisions of the law don't even make an exception for law enforcement.
Right, and
so,
this goes back to the Hillary Clinton stance of not only is she advocating for the complete outright confiscation and ban on semi-automatic weapons, it also goes to standard capacity magazines. We're talking the 1911 magazines, the AR-15 magazines, the 25 round 22 long rifle magazines. It's insanity. They're going to
even further than that.
They're going to ban the
tubular magazines.
Yeah,
like on a Marlin Model 6
8-round N block clip that goes to your M1 Garand is going to be banned.
So that's 8 is far more than 5.
Exactly.
So that's high capacity right there.
That is.
Yeah.
And never mind the fact that how many crimes were confiscated or are conducted with the use of an M1 Garand in New York. I'm going to say 0.
I would dare say 0. I think the numbers on actual assault rifles, quote unquote assault rifles being used in crimes is something like 340 throughout the year. And I mean, there's more people killed with empty beer bottles.
Yeah, knives and empty beer bottles. And in New York too, I think more people are killed actually by New York City Police Department officers.
And not necessarily the ones that they're aiming at.
Yeah,
that's really the sticker right there.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to go ahead and bring up a news story that is in the news today. A pastor in a Detroit church shot and killed a man in the vestibule of the church as the individual was wielding a hammer. And this is out of Fox News, which is just relaying the information from a local news channel that tells a story about a man named Deontay Smith and an unidentified, unnamed pastor at the City of God Church with a brick and a hammer. So,
so rule number 1 is do not bring a brick and a hammer to a gunfight.
Yeah. And not only that, don't go after somebody you've had a previous incident with. So
that's just...
The reason that I bring this up is that we see that there is an individual such as the pastor who's had a previous altercation with the individual and who has filed previous police report, not wanting to let himself be a victim and really following the advice of the chief of police, and has decided to go ahead and arm himself.
Well, and this is something to consider, that there's the plus of he will be alive to go to court, but there is the downside. He's got to go to court.
Well, and here's the thing: you're going to go to court. However, I think that there can be demonstrated a clear intent to menace or harass the individuals at that church, not necessarily the pastor in specific, but here's the difference between here and the church in Charleston. The folks at the church in Charleston were unarmed. And not only that, their assailant sat with them for a long period of time, likely to determine if, in fact, they did have a method to defend themselves. And after determining that they didn't, went ahead and committed his crime. It didn't just snap. This is something that the individual had decided long ago to do, and after verifying that he had a more than likely probability of being able to complete his crime, decided to go ahead and do it. On the contrary, in this side, it doesn't look like the individual was able to go ahead and cause further chaos or kill anyone because somebody was able to defend themselves and not have to wait for police department to show up.
Right, because what's the joke? When seconds count, the police are only minutes
away. Yeah,
and like a true statement would be that the average 911 response time in the United States is like 23.5 minutes, and a 158 grain jacketed hollow point out of a 357 moves about 1,400 feet per second. So
yeah,
you got an issue of speed there.
Yeah, and I think that it's a interesting side note to the story that the audio reporting of it that I had heard mentioned that the pastor had shot his assailant more than once. However, he had one round striking the assailant in the chest. So I'm thinking that, either this individual was rushing the pastor, or the pastor genuinely tried to restrain himself from having to shoot the individual until it was evident that he was going to be threatened.
So do you think that the pastor would have been shooting to wound?
No,
or...
I don't think, honestly, anytime you hear somebody say, oh, well, you can always shoot to wound, that's a person who's never been faced with that situation before.
I would agree with you. There's no reason to shoot to wound. If it's a situation where you have to use a firearm, you best kill that motherfucker.
Yeah,
I mean, there just ain't no way, ain't no other way to say it.
Yeah,
because
that is the reason why, in fact, that the new Army modular handgun system is going to have other calibers considered rather than the 9mm solely, for the sheer fact that the number of complaints lodged by soldiers due to the stopping power ability of the 9mm round has
and then once again we get into
less than underwhelming.
Right, but then again, we also have to get into the limitations of the round that the military uses. Currently, they use a 125 grain 9mm full metal jacketed bullet.
Yeah, and that's the thing. With the change that the Army lawyers have come up with, you're going to start seeing the use of jacketed hollow point rounds. So,
and I'll tell you what, I think that you will see the 9mm being not considered as underpowered once you've got the right ammunition.
The only problem is we're going to need to go back to war to make that determination. Because
I don't think that there's necessarily a going back to war like we ever stopped being at war. Because
you didn't hear combat operations in Afghanistan are over.
Combat operations in Afghanistan are over, but we're still keeping 10,000 troops or 9,800 troops.
Oh, that's for advisors.
Advisors, that's right. Advisors.
That's right. Anybody out there that's been to combat understands that the second you get off the plane in a hostile environment, you are now in combat. There is no such thing as non-combat troops. If you're having to go over there with body armor and a rifle, I'm sorry, folks, that is a combat troop.
Now, with the 125 grain full metal jacket, you've got a bullet that doesn't necessarily deform. It doesn't necessarily complete a complete energy dump of the round's kinetic energy into the target. You've got a greater chance of, number one, the bullet not deforming, and number two, a straight pass through, which is, well, it's a waste of energy.
Yeah, I want that bullet to lodge somewhere, preferably close to the spine. That's
yeah, and to open up a little bit, like become a little bit bigger than its 0.355 diameter. Like let's go to a good old half inch right there.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing.
There's some flinch where we're at.
There was some concerns by the Army's legal team talking about the use of hollow point ammunition having to create a unnecessarily large wound channel. I think that there's an argument there that says, you're kind of you're six in one hand, half a dozen in the other when you have to use 4 rounds to subdue an attacker, vice 1 round. And like I said, I'm a proponent of having to use the 45 just for the sheer fact that I have heard very few stories of soldiers in combat having to use a 45 and needing to shoot their opponent more than once in order to get them to either give up altogether or to be able to be permanently done with that threat.
I'm pretty sure that once different options for defensive ammunition, such as a jacketed hollow point or even a ballistic tipped hollow point, say something like a Hornady critical duty or anything off of their critical line, critical duty or critical defense. I think something like that really increases the quote unquote power of the round. We've seen that the FBI has completely turned their back on the 40 caliber round. They've gone back to the 9mm. They've shown that the 40 caliber doesn't really have any kind of increase necessarily in quote unquote stopping power. And what it does have is it's got an increased cost per round. and then increased wear and tear on the weapons that fire them. And I think you can see that like in the used market quite often. You see a lot of Glock 22 and 23s for sale, and a lot of those are police weapons and the trade-ins. And I would almost guess that whatever department turned in those Glocks, they, in the 40 caliber, they went back to a 9mm.
Well, and here's the thing. You talk about the 9mm possibly being a better round. I think that you can't do an apples to apples comparison of the ammunition. I think what it needs to be is you get whatever your perceived best round is for each caliber, and you see what the damage is. And it'd be interesting if we kept combat statistics that are verifiable and reproducible in terms of the performance of the ammunition.
I think we try to reproduce the combat performance every day, and to be honest with you, I think we've done it every day that I've been alive.
But that's only in places like Chicago where it doesn't count.
Chicago, that's an interesting subject right there. Mossad Mayor Rahm Emanuel has stated that gun crimes in Chicago are on the rise. Once again, he's a proponent of the confiscation idea as well. But the Chicago police are afraid of responding because they don't want to be a YouTube star.
Well, not only that, it's funny that His Honor decided to say that his cops have gone into the fetal position. So you once again have another mayor of a large metropolitan city who is alienating the rank and file police officers by basically calling them cowards. And I can't say that probably gets him the full faith and support of the police officers union.
Oh, I would dare say it doesn't, but that's kind of very interesting parallel with other places that have seen like a decline. And we'll just take like someplace like Zimbabwe, for instance.
Rhodesia, for folks that are still stuck in the 70s.
Right. We'll take a look at their economy and they're basically their hyperinflation, and the only jobs that kept up with hyperinflation, and by I mean keeping up with hyperinflation, was you were paid enough to where you could purchase food and purchase your basic necessities of life with that paycheck, were cops and the army, and basically anybody who was there to keep the ruling power in place. And so if you're law enforcement and you're listening, just remember, you're only useful as long as you are useful.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I think anybody who's willing to subscribe to the lies that come out of these debates, you're only useful as long as you cast your vote. So, can't get it in one.
And to be honest with you, I think you're only useful as long as Diebold counts your vote, because you could vote once, vote twice, vote harder than the next guy, and it really doesn't matter because the votes are counted by Diebold.
Yeah, well,
and we've seen this. We've seen this with military, with the military vote. How many military votes? Oh, we just found these 18 boxcars full of military ballots that we never counted before sorry guys.
Yeah. They'll count the hanging chads before they'll count the military votes.
Right. The military vote doesn't necessarily go along with the dominant paradigm. I think if you've got to take into consideration the guy who's actually got to be in the mud and the blood up to his knees, he may not necessarily vote the same way that let's just call him a chicken hawk sitting at home and, nice and safe, who can send somebody else's kid out to die. I would dare say that they have a difference in voting pattern.
No, they certainly do. And that's one of those things, the armed services routinely put out their demographics on a yearly basis, and they will tell you what the makeup is. One of the things that's interesting is that you have to go to the Gannett Corporation. They put out a series of military-centric digital media and print newspapers called Military Times, and Navy Times, Marine Corps Times, Air Force Times. Then you also have the Federal Times. So they all fall under the Military Times umbrella. They'll do a demographic, and it's shocking when you see that is between 76 to 78% of active duty federal military employees have conservative voting histories. So, why would those votes be counted? You know what I mean? Especially
they get those votes get in the way. Those votes do not lead to confiscation. They don't lead to any sort of reasonable debate on the gun control issue, because, well, honestly, the only thing reasonable is to agree with the anti-gun forces. That's the only thing that they will consider reasonable.
Yeah, and so you're basically creating a population who is your social test bed for all your different social programs that you want to do, whether it's single payer healthcare system, which is our TRICARE healthcare system, or our TRICARE dental program, or whether it's for integration, whether it be racial or gender. Just giving you a heads up. We've seen in the news that there have been 3 women graduates of the U.S. Army's Ranger School, and that there's actually some questioning.
And there's some controversy over that as to whether or not they kind of packed full gear.
Well, it's not so much that, and I believe that there's a question that's being posed by a member of Congress who himself is a former Ranger and a former Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. It's a well-known fact that usually Ranger candidates get a chance to be recycled once or twice, and if at the second recycling they don't meet the standard, they are returned to their unit. All of these women who have now successfully completed Ranger School were given at least 3 chances to complete Ranger training, and I believe that is the information that has been passed from what is called an inside source to the congressman, and the congressman has now started an investigation with the inspector general to determine if, in fact, these women were given additional chances to complete Ranger School, and if so, was it in violation of standards that other men were being held to?
Okay, so let's just kind of go out on a limb, and let's just say, kind of along the lines of Benghazi or the emails, this issue sort of disappears, and it becomes a standard practice to where women take a combat position, because you cannot say that being a Ranger is not a combat position.
No. What for folks who may not know, a Ranger is an elite small unit leader who is versed in the tactics of patrolling, small unit tactics and long forced marches, unconventional warfare type things. And the United States Marine Corps just recently published a story that had come to the conclusion that female Marines were not physically able to handle the tasks that their male counterparts were able to do.
And that's really not any kind of shocker, because, I mean, just for the pure fact of the differences in the physiology of a man versus a woman. A man has...
Now you're being genderist.
I'm being genderist and not accepting. Sorry, intolerant again.
So, and I think that's what goes to the narrative that's being pushed. You have,
but this also leads to some very interesting questions, because we know in the United States we've got the Selective Service Act, which requires every male at the age of 18 to register with Selective Service to be potentially processed into a draft or some sort of use by military forces at the nation's behest. If we're going to start having an equality, and an opening of combat opportunities to women, does that mean that at some point 18-year-old girls will have to register for Selective Service?
Well, see, that's one of those slippery slope arguments that I think that the nation itself is not ready to go ahead and have. And everything is about having a dialogue, right? Anytime there needs to be common sense, we need to establish a dialogue, and we need to have a rap session, and we need to get some things.
Right, I think we need to have a beer summit. Summit.
We need to make sure that we have a teachable moment. And the only thing that I can see truly coming out of this is that at some point, there is a push right now. I can tell you from my personal experience, I have seen the memorandums that have been sent out within the last month that say Ranger training is open to everybody and anybody. You send your candidates, which in a sense is good in a utopian society. However, I'm looking at it from a more practical standpoint of
who's going to have that covers your ass when you're getting shot at.
I want the most qualified, most physically and mentally capable individual to achieve that tab. I do not want somebody who is going to put his or her fellow Rangers and or service members that are usually working with these special operations folks at risk. And I'm not talking about an ability to go ahead and shoot and hit a target. I'm talking about the ability to make sound decisions with less than perfect conditions and or information under
not only that, but
stressful conditions.
There's also got to be just a level of unit cohesion. And I mean, and to be honest with you, there is a sense of camaraderie that cannot be broken with the integration of the genders into the military. I mean, seriously, anybody who's worked around a bunch of guys knows at some point you're going to make jokes or have conversations that are considered to be inappropriate, and it's normal guy stuff.
Well, and this is let me stop you right there, because I will tell you that in this current environment, that exact answer you're given right there, that it's normal guy stuff, is going to be countered with that is a male-dominated view, and you are wrong.
I am sexist now.
Yes.
Sexist and intolerant.
You are a misogynist for thinking that women are not able to do what they say they want to do. So,
yeah. Okay. All right. So let's switch back into the whole upper body stuff.
Well, I'm just telling you. This is the interesting thing. The Marine Corps report that was recently published said that there were deficiencies in terms of ability to hit targets when utilizing a service rifle and pistol, as well as being able to handle a physical workload in terms of the rucksack and the amount of weight that they could carry over a distance. So,
what is on the rucksack that they would have to carry?
Standard weight for U.S. Army field marches or ruck marches is 35 pounds in the rucksack. I've been in units where we've upped it to 50 pounds. And I'll tell you that when you go on deployment, your rucksack is even more full than that, because you're carrying a lot of ammunition, you're carrying a lot of batteries that weigh, quite a bit when you're loaded down with them. Food, water, change of clothes, extra magazines. You're carrying everything. So, not to say that there's not some people out there that can or can't do it, but I will tell you right now, I want the most qualified person, and if that happens to be a male, that's exactly who I want.
And I think you really can't fault somebody for wanting the most qualified behind it, because it's their ass that's on the line.
Yeah, and I think, like you're saying, until we get that terror in the heartland where the necessity to have firearms at your disposal, quick and ready, that's what it's going to take for people to sit there and think, maybe I shouldn't have gone for this, innocuous sounding gun grab candidate. Maybe I should have given this a little bit more consideration.
Maybe I should have enjoyed the gun show loophole while I had the chance.
Yes, indeed.
That's something we should kind of nail on real quick. There is no gun show loophole.
Right? That's a misnomer. That's misinformation. That's a redirection of fact. And I can tell you right now, in my state, our governor has just signed legislation that bans the concealed carry of firearms from all state buildings. And in my state, we have something that's called the Alcoholic Beverage Control. They are the only legally authorized entity that can sell taxable liquor in this state. So if you want to buy, you want to buy rum, you want to buy vodka, you want to buy, schnapps, you've got to buy it from the ABC stores. You will know.
Really? So that's very similar to Canada. Canada's kind of I know in the province of Ontario, they call it the OLB, the Ontario Liquor Board. And
Right.
basically you can't buy beer at the corner shop. You can buy beer at the beer store.
Right, and here's the thing. Different states cover it different ways. Texas, for a while, when I lived there in the early '90s, different counties were dry. Certain.
That's still the same way. We're half dry.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
My county is what would be considered a half dry county. You can have beer and wine. Liquor is somewhat restricted. There's different licensing for liquor, and
exactly.
to be honest with you, it's a little bit. Well, I should say it's a lot of bit killing of the competition because these licenses have to be approved, and only certain people get them, and it's more of the same.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I think we need to go ahead and hit up our 4 rules of firearm safety.
First rule of firearm safety is every firearm is loaded until you physically and visually verify that it is not loaded. So go ahead and pull that magazine out, clean that, pull that slide back, pop that bolt back, make sure that it is empty. Rule number 2 is keep that barrel pointed in a safe direction at all times. Do not cover anything with the muzzle that you do not wish to destroy. Rule number 3 is know what your target is and know what is beyond your target at all times. And truly, the most important rule of firearms ownership is keep that booger hook off the bang switch until you are ready to discharge the weapon. A lot of people talking about firearms like Glocks, that they don't like a Glock because it doesn't have a safety. Your biggest safety is your brain. And you have to remember to keep your finger off the trigger until it is ready to discharge it. Glock is perfectly fine. It's a different sort of weapon. Almost every revolver has no safety on it, and people don't seem to have a problem with that.
Yeah, and that's like I said, it all comes down to muscle memory and being familiar with your weapon. If you don't put the time in, to practice with it, you don't put you don't put those four pillars of firearm safety. You definitely want to do that because it's only going to up your chances of surviving an incident. And
really the important thing is that you are alive to show up in court. What's the saying? It's better be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I firmly believe that. And no matter what they say, confiscation-wise, don't give them a goddamn thing.
Yeah, and this is the thing. You've got 18 months until the next election. Look out for how many more incidents will happen. Never mind the fact that we get all spun up over the 6 or 7 people who get shot in one incident, but we don't care about the 300 who get shot over the course of a few months in a city like Chicago.
Right. Or over a whole weekend. We've had several weekends in Chicago where there's been 40 shot, 12 killed, 48 shot, 12 killed, and that doesn't generate any sort of response.
Yeah. So where is this Black Lives Matter movement when those numbers start getting published?
Yeah, that's really nice because I don't really want to crack on Black Lives Matter, but the idiocy of it is Black Lives Matter only when Black lives are taken by a non-black.
There you go. And when they get a chance to step up in front of Bernie the Sandman Sanders.
Yeah, and boy, I'll tell you what. I guess that's all. If we're going to play like the dominant media paradigm, all Putin has to do is hire himself a couple black chicks to go up there and get in Sanders' face, and he can do whatever he wants to do, huh?
There you go. So I want to give a big shout out to our listeners. Thanks for coming up and listening to our show. We get some good comments in chat and it keeps us going. Give a big shout out to Jules. Thanks for having us on there. And my buddy Chris, keep it going, buddy. And Michael, it's good to talk to you this week.
Nicholas, I enjoy it once again. I'd like to thank UCY.TV. It's really a gift for us to be able to do this. We both enjoy speaking about something we love and putting our feelings out there, and Jules gives us the platform to do that. UCY's got a little bit of everything for everybody.